Imagine it's May 27th, 1986. You're in Japan. It's a Tuesday. You walk into your local game shop and pick up a Famicom cartridge with a dragon on the cover. The game inside has no voice acting, no cutscenes, no open world. Just a lone hero, a small kingdom in peril, and a grid of menus that ask you to make decisions. Fight, run, spell, item. One turn at a time. The graphics are simple. The story is simple. And yet, something about it feels different from everything else on the shelf. That's because it is. You don't know it yet. Nobody does. But you are holding the game that will define Japanese role-playing games for the next 40 years. The blueprint that Final Fantasy will borrow from. The template that Pokemon, Chrono Trigger, and Dragon Age will all trace back to in one way or another. A game so beloved in Japan that its government will eventually ask fans to please stop calling in sick on launch days. This week, a genre is born. Hollywood takes its first swing at video games and whiffs spectacularly. A block of tofu changes Nintendo forever, and a very bad translation becomes one of the most quoted sentences in internet history. We're talking about all this and more on This Week in Video Game History. Welcome back, everyone. I'm your host, Doug Coleman, and this week we are covering May 25th through May 31st, a week that gave us the very last game ever released for the Nintendo Entertainment System, a Famicom Disk System table tennis game with a publishing mystery nobody has ever fully solved, a Japanese dating sim that a future legend of the industry wrote before he was famous, a Genesis port so badly translated it accidentally became a cornerstone of internet culture, a worm with a bazooka that defined a generation of dorm room gaming, and a kart racer that somehow made gravity optional. Plus, Hollywood made its first video game movie. It did not go well. A plumber was involved. We'll get to that. So grab your controller, press start to continue. We're starting in 1987 with one of the stranger footnotes in Nintendo's publishing history. Smash Ping Pong is, at its core, a port of Konami's 1985 arcade table tennis game. Fast, focused, genuinely excellent. But here's the thing. Nintendo published it, not Konami. Konami was one of the most active developers on the Famicom Disk System and fully capable of putting out their own games. Nobody has ever fully explained why Nintendo ended up holding the publishing duties on this one. The best theory is that it started life as a shelved Konami cartridge release that got quietly handed off somewhere along the way. The game's internal code has a serial number that lines up with a gap in Konami's known Famicom lineup. A missing cartridge that may have become this. Donkey Kong watches from the crowd. The FDS mascot Duskin shows up on the title screen. It never came to North America. Decades later, it quietly appeared on the Wii Virtual Console in Europe under the name Smash Table Tennis. And most people still have no idea it exists. In 1989, Towelplan released a perfectly respectable shoot-'em-up in Japanese arcades called Zero Wing. Nobody paid it much attention. Then came the Genesis port. Then came the North American localization. Then came a translation so catastrophically broken that it produced one of the most quoted sentences in the history of the internet.
All your base are belong to us.
In 2001, nearly a decade after this game shipped, that phrase exploded across message boards, flash videos, and early meme culture and became shorthand for an entire era of the web. The game itself? Fine. Forgettable even. But that opening cutscene, a masterpiece of unintentional absurdity, turned a game nobody played into a cultural artifact that everybody knows. Zero Wing is proof that sometimes the most lasting thing about a game has nothing to do with the game itself. In 1994, Konami released a dating simulation game for the PC Engine Super CD-ROM Squared that most Western listeners have never heard of, and it went on to sell over 1 million copies, spawn 50 sequels and spin-offs, and fundamentally shape how Japanese games handle romance, social mechanics, and character relationships for the next 30 years. Tokimeki Memorial puts you in a Japanese high school and gives you 3 years to build relationships, manage your stats, and hopefully confess your feelings to the right person before graduation. The infamous bomb mechanic, where neglected girls grow resentful and start sabotaging your other relationships, became one of the most talked about systems in Japanese gaming history. And the scenario writer, a young Koji Igarashi, who would go on to create Castlevania Symphony of the Night. The PC Engine never found a real audience in the West, but in Japan it was a genuine rival to the Famicom, and Tokimeki Memorial was one of the games that proved why. Here's a question for you. What was the very last officially licensed game ever released on the Nintendo Entertainment System? Not Wario's Woods, which was the final North American release in 1994. The actual last licensed NES game ever made, globally, was a PAL-exclusive port of The Lion King released in Europe on May 25, 1995. The NES was already 10 years old by then. The SNES had been out for 4 years. The PlayStation was launching the same year. And Virgin Interactive shipped a rushed, 6-level Lion King port for a console Nintendo had already moved on from, for an audience that had largely moved on too. The graphics were rough, even by 1995 NES standards. The controls were bad. You only ever play as a young Simba. You never get to fight Scar. It is, by most accounts, not a good game. But it is historically remarkable. The NES, the console that saved the entire video game industry, ended not on a triumphant first-party send-off, but with a licensed Disney tie-in that most of North America never even knew existed. That's the kind of ending only video game history can give you. I need to be honest with you for a moment. Worms Armageddon is on this list partially because it belongs here, and partly because it's one of those games that's permanently embedded in my memory in a way that's hard to explain without sounding like a complete nerd. Which, let's be clear, I am. It's 1999. I'm in a college dorm room, my fraternity brothers are all crammed around monitors, someone has figured out how to get the LAN working, and we are playing Worms for hours. Turn-based warfare with cartoon invertebrates, holy hand grenades, sheep, concrete donkeys, the kind of gaming session where someone lands a perfect ninja rope swing across the map and the entire floor erupts. Team 17's Worms Armageddon was the definitive version of the franchise that had been building since 1995. Tighter, funnier, more chaotic than anything that came before it. And here's the thing that still gets me. People are still playing it online today. In 2026. A game from 1999 with an interactive multiplayer community. That's not nostalgia. That's genuinely a great game. A quick note on dates before we get into this one. Japan got Mario Kart 8 on May 29th, North America and Europe on May 30th. Both dates fall into our window, so we're claiming it either way. Mario Kart 8 did something that sounds absurd on paper. It made gravity optional. Anti-gravity racing sections let drivers tear across walls and ceilings, which shouldn't work as a game mechanic, and somehow works perfectly. It was the best-selling game on the Wii U, which, if you know the Wii U's history, is a little like being the tallest person in a very short room. The console was struggling badly by 2014, Mario Kart 8 gave it its best sales week ever and genuinely extended its life. Nintendo later ported it to the Switch as Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, where it went on to sell over 60 million copies, making it one of the best-selling games in Nintendo's history. Not bad for a game that launched on a console most people skipped. We talked about May 27th, 1986 in the teaser, the day Dragon Quest launched in Japan on the Famicom. But here's the part of the story we didn't tell. When it finally came to North America 3 years later, Nintendo had a problem. A tabletop role-playing game company already owned the trademark on the name Dragon Quest in the United States. So Nintendo renamed it Dragon Warrior. That's strike one. Strike two, Nintendo massively overproduced the cartridge. They had hundreds of thousands of copies and nowhere near enough demand to move them. Their solution? Bundle it with Nintendo Power magazine subscriptions. Millions of American kids unwrapped a free RPG they didn't ask for and had no context for. And most of them put it down within an hour. Dragon Quest never caught on in the West the way it dominated in Japan. To this day, it remains one of the most beloved franchises in Japanese gaming history and a relative footnote in North America. A cultural gap that has never fully closed. Why did the game that invented the JRPG fail to conquer the West while Final Fantasy succeeded? That's a question worth sitting with. By 2013, the Wii U was in serious trouble. Sales were slow. Third-party support was evaporating. Nintendo needed something, and what they came up with was a team-based inked shooter starring squid-human hybrids that started life as a prototype featuring blocks of tofu with noses. Literal tofu. The development team at Nintendo EAD had pitched over 70 game concepts before landing on the ink mechanic. The idea of covering territory with paint could be both a weapon and a movement system at the same time. They couldn't use real characters until they knew the concept worked, so they used tofu blocks as placeholders. The tofu moved. The tofu shot ink. The tofu worked. By the time Splatoon launched on May 28th in Japan and May 29th in North America to be precise, it was Nintendo's first genuinely new IP since Pikmin in 2001. It sold nearly 5 million copies on a console that sold under 14 million units total. And it launched a franchise that now has 3 mainline entries, a dedicated competitive scene, and one of Nintendo's most passionate fan bases. All from a block of tofu with a note. May 28th, 1993. The most powerful IP on the planet walks into Hollywood for the first time, and what came out the other end was a fever dream science fiction film set in a parallel dimension where dinosaurs evolved into humans. Dennis Hopper played King Koopa as a corporate tyrant, and Bob Hoskins, who later said this was the only film he ever truly regretted, spent most of the shoot injured and, by his own account, drinking heavily just to get through the day. Super Mario Bros. Was the first feature-length live-action film ever adapted from a video game. It was made for $48 million. It grossed about $21 million domestically. Siskel and Ebert gave it 2 thumbs down and put it on their worst films of the year list. Nintendo was so burned by the experience that they spent nearly 30 years without licensing another Mario film, until Illumination's animated movie in 2023 grossed over $1 billion worldwide. The gap between those two films is one of the great cautionary tales in entertainment history. Imagine it's May 27th, 1986. A game designer named Yuji Horii is watching players pick up Dragon Quest for the first time. The game is simple, the world is small, but somewhere in that simplicity is an idea so powerful it will echo through every RPG ever made for the next 4 decades. He doesn't know that yet. Nobody does. But he knows he made something honest. That's the thing about this week. A block of tofu becomes a franchise. A bad translation becomes a legend. A rushed Disney port becomes the last chapter of a console era. A dorm room full of guys with a LAN connection finds something that still hasn't let them go. And Hollywood learns the hard way that the thing people love about a game is rarely the thing you can put on a movie poster. The history of video games is full of moments like these. Accidents and intentions, disasters and masterpieces. Things that should have worked and didn't. Things that had no right to work and somehow defined everything. That's what this show is about. Not just the hits. The whole messy, magnificent story of the medium we love. That is today's episode. Thank you very much, everyone, for watching. If you liked this episode, please hit the subscribe button on YouTube or follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Art for the episode and any shorts were done by Ms. Tink. Music created by Shane Mandini. A link to his Spotify is in the description below. This show is written, produced, and hosted by me, Doug Coleman. Be sure to save your game, nerds. I'll see you next week.